Hello, you. It is me. And I thought I'm going to take a little Amber break and talk about some other things, which includes a series of books that I have been reading. The first one here is Alice by Christina Henry. And I had heard about it as kind of a gangster version of Alice in Wonderland. And I thought that was fascinating. Excuse me, I do hear sirens going off. It's a little distracting. Hopefully it won't interfere anymore with this review. And I hope whoever is hurt is okay. Anyway, Amberlin reference. Anyway, so I thought a gangster version of Alice in Wonderland sounded very interesting. So I went ahead and got the book, obviously, and I read it. Now, I will say this book is very action-packed all the way to the end. The ending just kind of falls flat. It's a very simplistic way to end what seemed like a really interesting kind of twisty-turvy story. So that kind of sucked. Also, the writing is not great. So when action-packed things aren't happening, it feels a little stagnant. But this book was action-packed. So I would say it's a decent read, not a great read. But I'm a huge fan of Alice in Wonderland. And I wanted to read a new take, and it is a new take, and it's not bad. And like I said, there's action going throughout the whole book and to the very end. And if you know that the end is kind of simple, and very simple, and then it's done, it won't maybe take you aback. You'll expect it, so it won't be as bad. But anyway, so I heard there was a second book. So I went and got the second book, and that's this one, The Red Queen, it's called. And I thought, since the first book was very action-packed, that, but it did leave everything kind of open-ended. I thought, oh, this is a new adventure. I'm excited about that. So I got the book, and I read it. And this one starts off very slow. Because the writing isn't great, it was harder to get through, and when things started picking up around the middle of the book to the end. And again, it was an interesting enough story that I wanted to read it to the end. I love stories, and even if the writing isn't great, I still will usually finish it because I want to know what happens in the end. And this one, I think the end was a little more satisfying, but it still left open-ended. And so I was very excited to hear that there's a third book. So, guess what? I got it. Here's the third book. What I should have paid attention to, it's called Looking Glass. There we go. What I should have paid attention to is, right, it says The Chronicles of Alice Novellas. All right. I thought they meant the book was a novella, because none of these, they're all about the same amount of pages, around 289, something like that, under 300. And I think a novella classifies as maybe 150. I'm not sure on that. But I thought they meant the whole book was a novella. No, the book has 4 different stories in it. And let me tell you, the first story talks nothing about the characters we've been following in the other 2. It's about Alice's little sister. And could that have been interesting? Sure, but it wasn't. It just wasn't. If she had tied the sister to Alice a little stronger and made it part of an ongoing story, that would have been great. But she didn't. And honestly, it was so bad that I stopped reading. I didn't even finish the first story. I read the ending of the story because I wanted to know what happened, but it was awful. It was truly awful. And the writing was already not great. So introducing a new character and not even really connecting her to the story that's already being told, it's a whole new story, it was awful for me. I hated it. And so I ended up looking up the summaries of all 4 stories. And honestly, none of them sound interesting. They don't really tie together except for the last story. The last story is the continuation of the first 2 books. And apparently it seems to focus on the one thing I hated about the other 2 books, which is the romantic relationship that was forming. Hated that. I don't really like romance books because I think oftentimes they do it badly and it's not interesting to me. But the rest of the story was interesting enough that I went along for the ride, but I just hated the romance aspect. It just didn't need to be there. And it's actually the same thing that I complained about with what is it called? Good Omens. The first series that I watched on Amazon was brilliant. And the thing that I liked about it the most was the angel and the demon being best friends, caring and going far and beyond for each other. I love that part. And then in the second series, I felt they ruined it by making everything about love. And I don't care the main characters are male or female or anything. I'm not discriminating against it. But to make this beautiful bond and friendship that can exist without a romantic relationship, to take that and, in my opinion, just ruin it by throwing in a love between the angel and the demon, and then 2 other stories about, 2 other angel and demon romance that is forbidden. And that was kind of interesting, but not really. And then a whole nother relationship between 2 ladies that really went nowhere. And it was awful. It was absolutely awful. The first season was so good and I loved it so much. And the second one was all about love. And it just seemed phony and shoved in there like it didn't belong. And I hated it. And they left it open-ended for a 3rd one, which I don't think I'll watch. But getting back to this one, yeah, this didn't really further the story of the other 2, which is what I was looking for when I bought this book. I wasn't looking for 4 short stories. Now, if the 4 short stories had tied into the first 2 books more, then I would have been more interested. But honestly, boring. I looked up the summary of the other 3 stories. One of them completely forgettable. One of them talking about the history of one of the characters, which didn't matter. It absolutely did nothing to have a better understanding of the character. It was just an awful story. And the 4th one was the only one that actually furthered the story along, and it really didn't do much at all, except for the quote-unquote big secret at the end, which I predicted in the first book. It's that obvious, you know what's going to happen. It just... And I looked through them a little bit. I read this and that here and there. Honestly, I don't think I'm going to read it, like the whole thing. I tried, It was awful. And honestly, it just turned me off to Christina Henry completely. The writing is just not good. The storyline just took a dive. Again, if Looking Glass, the way that they sold it made me want to get it. There is, the moth gives a clue. It is in the first book, the characters Alice and Hatcher are trying to defeat the Jabberwock. That's what they call it, not Jabberwocky, but Jabberwock. And I thought this story was going to tie into that. I won't say what happens, because if you want to read it, I don't want to ruin it. But I thought this story tied into and a continuation of the Jabberwock. And the first story kind of did that, but in a really awful way. And it was so boring. Essentially what they did was they introduced a new character named Elizabeth, who is the youngest sister of Alice, who has the same miraculous powers and same miraculous attitude and blah, blah, blah as Alice. So she's an Alice replacement, which is more or less what they call her in the story. And it's just awful. It really is just awful. And I'm so disappointed, because I was looking forward to this last book to tie everything together and to make it make sense. And it didn't. It just didn't. So that is my opinion of the series of Alice by Christina Henry. It was a huge disappointment. And yeah, I'm probably just going to get rid of these books because they just looking at it frustrates me. You ever get that? Yeah, I did. I did that with another book by a popular writer who I can't remember right now. But I got a book that was probably his worst. Apparently he's a really big seller of books. But that story, even reading reviews of it, people hated it. So, I just got so mad at it that I got rid of it, because I just didn't want to look at it anymore. I hate spending good money, money that I don't really have, to get a book, because I want to be entertained and I want to be excited and enjoy it, and I just don't. It sucks. So that is my review, and I hope you enjoyed it. And that is all I have to say.